Witnesses described it as a sea of people. Tens of thousands of Venezuelans rushed to the border in Táchira state over the weekend when the government decided to temporarily open the border with Colombia. People don't have any food, this woman said. We're forced to do this and risk being crushed to death so that we can get across the border and get some food. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro ordered the border closed last August after a clash between Colombian paramilitary and Venezuelan troops. Since then, Venezuelans have been suffering all kinds of shortages. Even basic food products are scarce, as we were able to witness recently in Caracas, the capital. Visiting a supermarket is a good way to illustrate the collapse of the Venezuelan economy and the shortages and inflation that Venezuelan consumers are experiencing right now. For example, I'm standing here in the middle of this aisle. There should be milk on the shelves, and as you can see, they're completely empty. Earlier this month, about 1,000 desperate women dressed in white overwhelmed border authorities and crossed into Colombia. This weekend, Colombian migration authorities said nearly 100,000 Venezuelans went across. We want the border reopened for good, this man says. We need to resupply our pantries because here in Venezuela, we have nothing. Socialist President Nicolás Maduro says he's the victim of an economic war that seeks to destabilize the country and topple his government. Back at the border, a pregnant woman walks into Colombia hoping to be able to feed her family and her soon-to-be-born child. Not too far away, an elderly woman walks with the help of a cane. Politics is far from their mind. For now, all they can think of is filling their stomach. Rafael Romo, CNN, Caracas.
Venezuelans cried at the sight of fully stocked supermarket shelves in Colombia. Pregnant women, children, and even elderly Venezuelans crossed into Colombia on Sunday after the border was temporarily reopened, allowing them to buy basic foods and toiletries, rare commodities in their home country. Tearful Venezuelans had gone weeks without basic food items like milk, flour, and toilet paper. It's a sad but common part of daily life today in crisis-ridden Venezuela, a country that has the world's largest proven reserves of oil. Colombian officials estimate that about 100,000 Venezuelans crossed the border. Venezuela is expected to dive deeper into the abyss this year, according to new projections published Wednesday by the International Monetary Fund. The IMF forecasts Venezuela's economy will shrink 10% this year, worse than its previous estimate of 8%. It also estimates that inflation in Venezuela will catapult to 700% this year, up from the earlier guess of about 480%. Venezuela's economic condition continues to deteriorate, says Alejandro Werner, chief Latin America economist at the IMF. The estimates for growth and inflation are the worst worldwide. The numbers are just the tip of the iceberg. Venezuela is deep into a humanitarian crisis. People are dying in ill-equipped hospitals and many live without basic food items. Venezuela can't pay to import goods because its government is desperately strapped for cash after years of mismanagement of its funds, heavy spending on poorly run government programs, and lack of investment on its oil fields. In January, Maduro packed the country's Supreme Court with allies to prevent opposition leaders from passing new legislation. Maduro also refuses to allow a referendum vote on his presidency. Most recently, Congress has attempted to strip some of the country's Supreme Court judges of their power and appoint new ones. It's all even more tragic given that despite Venezuela's oil abundance, its state-run oil company, PDVSA, is broke. Venezuela's oil production fell to a 13-year low in June, according to OPEC, of which it's a member. Its cash and gold stockpile are dwindling too. Venezuela's foreign reserves are now a mere $11.9 billion, according to its central bank. 2 years ago it had $20 billion. The country has had to ship gold to Switzerland this year to help pay down its debts. Venezuela could be quickly approaching an economic judgment day. It owes about $5 billion in a string of bond payments between October and November. Many experts believe the chance of default is very high. Venezuela has decided to temporarily reopen the border with Colombia, and many are taking advantage to cross into Colombia to purchase food. Venezuelans in long lines, we need food and medicine. It should have been a day to celebrate. Nearly everyone in Venezuela had the day off Sunday for Workers' Day, and to sweeten it, the government gave workers a 30% increase in the minimum wage. Venezuelan state television broadcast images of people marching in Caracas, waving signs supporting President Nicolas Maduro in their emblematic red garb. But the pay hike isn't as good as it sounds. According to the International Monetary Fund, inflation in Venezuela is projected to increase 481% this year and by a staggering 1,642% next year. The rise in the minimum wage will mean nothing in just a few weeks. So on May Day, the annual holiday honoring the country's workers, people on the streets of Caracas seemed anxious. It was pouring rain, not usually the kind of weather for walking. But Julian Perez came to the city's commercial center prepared to get in line. That's how Venezuelans spend most of their time now, waiting not for luxuries but basic goods. It wasn't long before Perez walked toward a subway station soaked and empty-handed. Sunday was one of 2 days when he's allowed to buy staples at government supermarkets, where a rationing system has been put in place determined by the final digit of his personal ID. But when Perez and others arrived, expecting to see the usual lines that form at government stores, they found they were shut tight for the national holiday. Most of the private-owned supermarket chains were also closed. My ID ends in 9. I can only come back here on Friday now, Perez said. I don't think I'll be able to make it though. It's impossible. At home, Perez said, his shelves are bare. I was going to buy flour, rice, all the basics I have been needing for weeks, and now, I leave with nothing, he said. We are hungry. The ration system was put in place by Maduro's government after dropping oil prices led to major deficits, which the government countered by printing money. The result, extreme inflation, making imports of basic goods unaffordable. The goal, officials have said, is to give people access to price-controlled food that's much cheaper than it would be in a private store. On Monday, the rain had stopped and the stores were open, but that didn't make the people waiting more optimistic. We are hungry, Zula Urbina told CNN as she stood outside one of the government stores. We have needs. We have no food. Look at this line here: mothers who are hungry and have needs. We need food and medicine. We can't find anything. What's finishing us off? Hunger. For Lides Nanez, a mother of 2 who is 6 months pregnant, the situation is dire. She lives in one of the barrios, the country's favelas, where she said she has had no access to basics such as milk or rice for weeks, and where she has to wait up to 12 hours in line at her local store. There are only a few items inside her refrigerator and no milk for her 2 small children. When I can find it, she said, they drink it. She can't get the care she needs. The rationing and shortages go beyond food and have now extended to basic medical care. For Yuste Bolivar, who underwent a double mastectomy in December and was subsequently diagnosed with skin cancer, the lack of access to chemo has put her life at risk. It pains me to see Venezuela is the state that it's in right now, Bolivar said, sitting on her porch in a suburb near Caracas. But what really makes my heart ache is the thought of not being here for my daughter tomorrow. Due to the high costs of her treatments, Bolivar and her 9-year-old daughter, Alejandra, moved back in with her parents. Her mother, Jeanette de Bolivar, a social worker, said she fears her daughter may be running out of options. Her condition requires her to follow a certain diet, and we can't get the food we need. She needs medicine and treatment, and she can't get the care she needs, the mother said, fighting back tears. What can we do in order to make the government understand that Venezuelans are dying? Maduro said capitalism and corruption have caused the health system to become compromised. In a recent televised speech, he said an internal mafia in the public health system was falsifying prescriptions and stealing medicines to be sold on the black market. For Bolivar and her family, all she is looking for is a solution fast. Cancer waits for no one, she said. I am so worried about my health and the health of so many people who are going through this now.
There should be milk on the shelves, and as you can see, they're completely empty. Earlier this month, about 1,000 desperate women dressed in white overwhelmed border authorities and crossed into Colombia. This weekend, Colombian migration authorities said witnesses described it as a sea of people. Tens of thousands of Venezuelans rushed to the border in Táchira state over the weekend when the government decided to temporarily open the border with Colombia. People don't have any food, this woman said. We're forced to do this and risk being crushed to death. So that we can get across the border and get some food. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro ordered the border closed last August after a clash between Colombian paramilitary and Venezuelan troops. Since then, Venezuelans have been suffering all kinds of shortages. Even basic food products are scarce, as we were able to witness recently in Caracas, the capital. Visiting a supermarket is a good way to illustrate the collapse of the Venezuelan economy and the shortages and inflation that Venezuelan consumers are experiencing right now. For example, I'm standing here in the middle of this aisle